Afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Water Supply Development Revolving Fund webinar. We're hoping today to answer as many questions as we can about this new fund. We're very excited about it. We think it's going to do a lot of good in rural Arizona for water projects that are very, very needed. So we're very happy to see you all joining us today. While we're waiting for the last few folks to jump on, I'm just going to go over some housekeeping for us today. The first is, and all of you should have been notified of this when you joined, but this webinar is being recorded, and we're doing that for your convenience because we will post a recording of all the slides that we used today and of the webinar itself. So that way, if there's something that you miss, or if you feel like you want to share this with somebody, you will be able to do that. At the end of the webinar, we're going to turn this into an interactive call, so we will have time, significant time for questions and answers from all of you. You can ask questions in a couple of ways. So the first way is to use Zoom's Q&A feature, where you'll actually type in your question. It's there probably at the bottom or at the top of your screen, to do that. If you do that, feel free to do that and ask those questions as we go along in the presentation. Just know that we won't be interrupting the presentation to answer those. We'll take all of the questions at the end, and that way we can kind of sort through and make sure that we, if there's repeats, we answer those once, those sort of things. The other way to ask questions is to use the raise hand feature on Zoom. So when we get to our Q&A section, just raise that hand. It'll come to the top of my screen. I'll be able to unmute you, and that'll allow you to ask your question in real time, interact with us if it's something that is just too difficult to type, or you just prefer to interact like real people as opposed to typing things in. We appreciate that, and we'll give you the opportunity to do that too. So with that, we're going to get started, hopefully get as much information out of today as possible. And I will turn the rest of the time over to Lindsay Jones, who is our Assistant Director for Water Projects here at WIFA and our resident expert on this program, and she'll walk you through it. So Lindsay, take it away.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. All right. Yeah, so very exciting to be here talking today about the Water Supply Development Revolving Fund. So at WIFA, we manage a few different funding resources for water, wastewater projects. This is, in some ways, a new funding program for us. We have had it in statute for quite a while, but we're excited to now finally have some money to do something with it. So in addition to the existing SRF loan programs that we manage, which are primarily supported by the federal funds, the state legislature decided to inject approximately $200 million into the previously dormant Water Supply Development Fund. And this fund is really focused on the more rural portions of Arizona. So WIFA staff has been hard at work to get this fund operational. We have adopted rules and we have adopted policies and we've drafted rules for this funding program. Once the rules are formally approved, WIFA will officially be opening this third revolving fund program, which will be providing even more resources for Arizona communities. But this funding program really is unique as it's directed to address the challenges faced by our rural communities. The funds are only going to be available for communities outside of the larger municipalities of Maricopa, Pima, and Pinal counties. And then since this is a state-funded program, it's not going to have some of the federal requirements that we see in WIFA's SRF programs, such as Davis-Bacon and American Iron and Steel and those things. So we're really excited about opening this up, and we'll be diving into some of the eligibility and next steps throughout the presentation today. So go to the next slide. So as far as who is eligible for this funding program, as I indicated, it's meant for rural Arizona. So it is within statute with ARS 491201, and it states that eligible entities include water providers as well as cities, towns, counties, districts, commissions, authorities, and then other public entities who are located outside of the Phoenix, Pinal, and Tucson active management areas. Those are the initial active management areas where the CAP aqueduct is located. Anyone within those AMAs is not eligible for this fund, but outside of those AMAs, you will be eligible as long as you're either a water provider or one of those entities listed under B, the cities, towns, counties. For who is a water provider, we have that listed in the light blue box there. That's going to include municipal water delivery systems, Native American tribes, augmentation authorities, public water systems or PWSs, and then the natural resource conservation districts and community facility districts. So very wide encompassing as far as who is eligible, just geographically limited to the more rural parts of Arizona. As far as what types of projects are eligible, I mean, it really is in the name for this fund. So it's anything related to the water supply development for the communities. That can include acquiring water rights or contracts for water, as well as any projects related to the conveyance and delivery of water, storage or recovery of water, the reclamation and reuse of water, the replenishment or recharge of groundwater, the active or passive stormwater recharge projects that increase water supplies, and then conservation projects that reduce existing use or make use more efficient for existing water supplies. So pretty wide encompassing on the types of projects that we could see being funded through this program. And to go to the next slide here, the funding program is limited by statute to a total of $5 million per project. So WIFA can provide assistance in the form of loans, grants, or a combination of the two. It will be based on financial need as well as the project benefit points that a project receives, but an entity may be eligible for a single loan of up to $3 million, a single grant of up to $2 million, or possibly a combination of loan and grant, but the maximum combined total would be $5 million per project. And so we'll dig into that just a little bit more to give some more understanding of how that mix between grant and loan will be determined. So right now, we have our preliminary application on our website, which is called the Project Priority List or PPL application. Within that application, we tried to make it very clear how the scoring for these applications will work and how the determination of grant versus grant and loan versus just loan will be determined. So every application will have their total priority value points, which would be a combination of the points that the application receives for the different things such as the water demands, the project benefits, the feasibility, and then the financial need of the community. So just to dig into each of those a little bit further, the water demands points will be based on its existing and near-term, long-term demands as it's compared to what the current water supplies are. So more points are going to be given to those projects that can provide some sort of documentation that shows there's an existing deficiency. Documentation could include things like studies and sources for demand projections performed by licensed hydrologists or published internal or external supply and demand studies, any hydrologic publications or water models that are really showing that there's a deficiency for that community will be needed to get the maximum water demand points. Additionally, some water demand points are possible for systems that have issues with wells going dry or having water outages for their customers. For the project benefits points, there's a lot of different ways to get the different points within the project benefit category. So we'll really be looking at the long-term reliability and security of the water supplies that are being proposed to be developed through the project. If the project's able to provide multiple benefits or to benefit multiple jurisdictions, multiple areas, that would get more points. We'll be asking questions about the applicant's existing and planned conservation practices, any best management practices, or water management programs that already exist or are planned, as well as asking for if there's any comments from water users or local citizens or affected jurisdictions. So all of those types of criteria will be evaluated for the project benefit score of up to 130 points. We have the feasibility score of up to 60 points, which would really be based on the project's design and operational feasibility, if it's a cost-effective project, and then the degree to which you're maximizing or trying to leverage other available funding sources. Finally, we have the 100 points for the financial need category, which is determined based on the area's median household income, or MHI, which can be found on the US Census website. So we will compare the area's MHI to the state's MHI and determine the amount of points, which will range from anywhere from 0 to 100 points. And the exact values can be found within that PPL application, which, as I said, is on our website. So once we get all of those scores determined and verified by WIFA staff after you submit an application, we'll use that table 1 there for the financial assistance index scoring. So we'll determine based on the total priority value points and the financial need points, what financial index score is the project is receiving. If it's anywhere between a 70 to 75%, those projects and communities will be considered WIFA's priority communities and will be eligible for the most grant versus loan for their project. And we'll dig into table number 2. And let's go to the next screen here, and we'll go through some examples of how this score will work exactly. So if your project scores high enough to get the index score of 70 to 75%, you'll be eligible to receive up to $2 million in grants. Any cost over $2 million would be covered by the loan funds, not to exceed $3 million in loans for a maximum of $5 million. If your index score is 80%, then the project is eligible to receive up to $5 million with an even split of 40% grant and 60% loan. And then finally, if your score is 85 to 95% for the index score, you're not going to be eligible for any grant funds, but you will still be eligible for a loan, which will be capped at $3 million and will still be having a subsidized interest rate below market rates. So we provide some examples on the right here of how the math would work out for different project examples. Again, for that first row, the tier 1 projects, if they had $2 million or less requested, they could potentially get 100% provided as grant, versus the project 1 on the third tier, if $2 million was requested, 100% could be provided as loan. And again, for the tier 3, it is capped at $3 million instead of 5 because those projects would not be eligible for grant funds. So for the application process, for any of you who are familiar with our SRF application process, it is very similar to that process where we have a 2-step application process and then a committee and a board to review it. So the very first step and the phase that we're in right now is the project priority list application. We have that available on our website. It's the preliminary application, which asks some high-level details about the project you're proposing and determines the scoring and ranking that your project will receive and the amount of loan versus grant that will be recommended for your project. So very first step in this process will be to submit that PPL application. Like I said, it's on our website. It is a fillable PDF form, which will be emailed in once completed. Staff will review that application, confirm the applicant is eligible, the project is eligible, and then confirm that what the scoring is for that proposal. Once all of that is determined and we add your project onto our project priority list, we will be providing you a project finance application or PFA, which will ask more in-depth details about the project, about the system, about financial indicators, especially if there's going to be any loan component for the proposal. We'll have to get lots of information on that. And then once that's submitted to us, we will add eligible projects onto the next available committee agenda. So we have a water supply development committee who is responsible for making recommendations on all the projects we receive to our board. So the committee will meet, review the project, make a recommendation whether to fund that project or not, and then that will go on to our board who meets every month and will hear those projects and make the final decision. So we do have on the next screen here, we can go over the calendar and the timelines for this. So we currently have the PPL applications open. We made those available on April 10th. We are having a PPL due date of May 15th for the first round of funding. That May 15th date is relying on us having our rules be effective on May 10th. So we are hopeful that our rules are going to be effective May 10th. If there was any delays in getting our formal approval for the rules, we may have to push that PPL due date back just a little bit, but we are anticipating that this will be the deadline going forward. So we have application date for the preliminary applications, May 15th. All of those applications that are added onto our list will then be provided a PFA to be submitted to us by June 5th if the applicant is wanting to go to the very first committee meeting. So we'll have our first water supply development committee meeting. July 17th is the anticipated date. It is subject to change, but that is what we're anticipating for the very first date when we'll have projects before the committee. The committee will make recommendations on those, and all of the projects will then go to our August board meeting for the final decision from the board. I want to just make sure it's clear that while we have these deadlines, it is more of a rolling application process. So for projects that aren't ready to go for this first cycle, we encourage you still to look at the application, prepare for applying, because immediately after we have this deadline, we'll just any projects that submit after the deadline, we'll just consider going into round 2, which would be having a September PPL application due date with an October PFA due date, November Water Supply Development Committee, and then December board date. We are anticipating having at least 3 committee meetings every year, and right now are planning those for March, July, and November. Again, subject to change, but that is what the plan is right now. So people can plan out for when you're really seeing that you're going to need funding for your projects, and then look at what kind timeline you want and what committee meeting you potentially would want to be shooting for to get your application submitted by. Like I said, though, applications are on our website. We have a little screenshot of just the first page there, but we're really excited to have people start submitting applications, and we're hoping to get a good list of applications for the first round of funding here. So as far as some resources for you, to find everything on our website, you simply click on the funding options and then click the Water Supply Development Fund. That'll take you to the landing page, which will have all the resources, including the PPL application. That will be where we post this webinar and the slides for this webinar. And that's also where you can then find the project managers that have been listed on this slide. So we want to make it very clear that this application process, we are anticipating having lots of WIFA staff technical assistance for applicants as they're filling out these applications. We can give you one-on-one assistance, talk you through the application for all of this. So we have our project managers who will be available for any of you for questions, and they are determined by what counties they're helping. So we have them all listed here. Any questions that you might have, just look at what project manager is helping for your county, and then feel free to reach out to them, and they'll be happy to help you through any of those questions. So with that, I think that was just about our last slide. So as Chelsea said, we have lots of times for questions, and we'll go ahead and take questions now.
All right, Lindsay. So we do have a couple in the Q&A already. Again, I'll remind everybody that you're welcome to type your questions into the Q&A or use the raise hand feature, and I can unmute you and you can ask your question in real time. So we'll start with one from Sonia Gasho. She asks, you mentioned that ratings, so those project ratings will be higher based on existing work and projects. So how will a project or a water system that's brand new rank? Will it be too low to qualify for the grant assistance?
So I think I understand the question. So there is a few of the project benefit points could be related to if a system has some existing conservation best management practices that are already occurring. If it's a brand new system and you don't have any existing conservation projects, you won't get necessarily those points, but there still will be plenty of other areas in the application where you could get points. And also, just to be clear, the points will determine what tier you'll fall into if you're going to be recommended to get a grant versus a loan versus a combination. So we don't anticipate anyone would rank too low that there would not be funding available for that project because we have almost approximately $200 million and it's limited to $5 million per project. We anticipate being able to fund quite a few projects with this. So.
Okay. And Sonia, if you need follow-up on that, you can either type something else in or raise your hand. We can go ahead and interact on that one. In the meantime, John Ritter asks, can we combine projects? So for example, new generators, booster pumps, mail line replacement, or should each project be on a separate application?
Yeah, absolutely. You can combine projects. Again, you'll want to make sure you're staying under the $5 million maximum for a project. But combining multiple projects, if you have, you know that you need to put in a storage tank and a well and a generator, that could all go on one application.
Okay. Erica has asked if we can go back to the previous slide with the project manager information. I'm happy to do that. And while we're on that slide and you're taking a look at that contact information and that, I will just remind everybody too that we will be posting this presentation online as well as the recording of the webinar itself. So all of this information will be available for you to use, disseminate however you need to. And then also at azwiffa.gov, we have all of this information. This is where it'll be posted. But sometimes it can be not exactly intuitive to get to where you think you need to go. So if you are looking for Water Supply Development Fund specific information, go to our main page at azwiffa.gov. At the top, you're going to click on funding options. It'll bring you a drop-down menu. Click on Water Supply Development Fund, and that'll bring you to the little page that we have screenshotted there. So Erica, thanks for doing that and giving me the chance to remind people of how to find it all. We will move on now to a question from Lori Knob. Is there a forgivable principal associated with the loans?
So no forgivable principal would be associated with the loan portion of this because we are anticipating doing a mixture of grants and loans. So if you were falling into the third tier and just eligible for loan, none of that would be considered for forgivable.
Ernest Behringer, we have how is and who determines the project feasibility? So basically, talk more about the project feasibility determination.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we tried to be very clear in the application. So if you go to the website and open the project priority list application, you'll see a section for feasibility. Within that feasibility section, there are 3 questions. So it's based on the design and operational feasibility. It's looking at, do you already have a preliminary engineering report or some other report that shows that the feasibility of designing and operating this project has been looked at and has been determined feasible. We also ask a question on if the cost effectiveness of the project has been determined and has some documentation to show that this is a cost effective solution to the problem that you're facing. And then finally, we ask a question about the funding sources. And it's really just if additional funding sources have been sought for the project or not, we'll determine if you get points on there. So just 3 little questions on feasibility, but the big one really is the design and operational feasibility. So having some sort of preliminary engineering reports or something like that will go a long way for that.
All right. And again, I'll remind anybody who's either asked a question or has a question, if you want to use the raise hand feature to follow up on our answer or kind of ask a follow-up, you're welcome to do that. From Paul Hendricks, if there's a new well being drilled and it's in progress because of wells that are going dry, are funds we've already spent eligible?
Really great question, Paul, and good to see that you're joining. Possibly, so we pre-award costs most likely will be eligible. We'll likely put a date of when the pre-award costs, a back date of when those would be eligible for. Because this is a state-funded program, we don't have the same concerns of we do usually on the SRF program of the Davis-Bacon and American Iron and Steel and things like that. So more likely that they could be eligible, but that is something that we're still looking at further and can give more guidance on as far as what date would be allowed for any pre-award costs to be reimbursed.
Okay, and then Paul, you had a similar question about water sustainability studies. So Lindsay, I think your answer would probably be the same to that, but I'll go ahead and give you a chance to address that as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's basically any money that has already been spent. If it's for an eligible project, for an eligible entity, it's possible that those pre-award costs could be reimbursed, but it is something that we'll provide further guidance on.
Perfect. All right, from Richard Candelaria, he asked that, so under the data.census.gov website, Concho is listed, but there's no information on the MHI. So is there another source that would be applicable? And Richard, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk as well to follow up on that question if you need to. So Lindsay, I'll let you answer, and then Richard jump in as necessary.
And
Thank
yeah,
you.
and it's a great question, Richard, because we know that the census website does not have all of the MHIs for every single entity. There's some gaps there. So we are certainly able to take alternative sources. We've had communities that have done just like a survey, income surveys for their communities to prove what the MHI is, or if there's alternative sources that we could look at if it's not within the census website. Additionally, we could also just look at a larger area. So if you can't find it for the specific area, looking at like the larger census tract for that area, we could determine. And we're happy to dig into the census website and try to determine the most appropriate MHI to use for your system. So happy to help on those questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so next question is from Michael Farr. Is this funding targeted for housing or commercial development?
Well, I would say it's certainly intended more for community water systems, for residents, for housing develop, more for the community and the housing, but certainly for other entity or other purposes, I could see projects being eligible still.
Yeah, and I think she's looking at the diversity of entities that are eligible for receiving the funding kind of shows that the intent of the program is to be pretty wide reaching.
Yeah.
So it really just is about those water supply development benefits, and the more you can show that on a community basis so that it's benefiting multiple users, multiple people, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
All right, so an anonymous attendee asks, if the feasibility is all negative, can the project still be funded? So I might need a little bit of follow-up on that from this attendee if you'd like to raise your hand and talk a little bit more, but that's the question. So Lindsay, I don't know if you want to take that one.
So I'm assuming if you're saying all negative, that means if you're looking at the application and you are getting 0 points in that feasibility section, can it still be funded? And the answer is yes, absolutely. You don't have to get points in any of the sections really to be eligible for funding. It's getting those points will help to boost you up into the categories where you can get grant funds versus just loan funds. So still eligible, still possible to get funding. It'll just help you to get those points for feasibility.
From John Ritter, he asks, if we have a booster pump system that's going down and we have to spend money to replace the system, is this an eligible project for grant money?
So, booster pumps, certainly it's related to the conveyance and delivery of the water. As far as if it's eligible for grants versus loans, that's going to be determined by the scoring in the application. And then, as we said previously, some pre-award costs likely eligible if you're having to start the project before you're actually awarded, but we'll give more guidance on the requirements and the pre-award date for that.
Stuart Rosner asks if there are water providers to partner with that we would suggest. So can you suggest some water partners or water providers that we can partner with? And Stuart, I see you have your hand raised as well. So I'll let Lindsay answer and then follow up as necessary.
Yeah, I mean, we had the list of the water providers, and Chelsea, if you want to go back to that screen, there's a wide range of who is eligible for these types of funding, but water providers including NRC, the Natural Resource Conservation Districts, and the public water systems. There's lots of them out there. So, to find public water systems information, you can always use ADQ's SIDWIS system. But as far as like a list of potential partners. We don't necessarily have that. So I don't know if that answers the question or if there's any follow-up.
Well, um, what I'm going to be doing is probably purifying water and generating electricity using solar energy. And it really has not been done before. My originally thought was to bring salt water from the Pacific, but maybe this can be done in with local water supplies. So that's what the idea was. And I don't live out in Arizona, so I'm from the East Coast. So finding the quote unquote water providers to partner with might be a little bit difficult from here, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So we would love to see those types of partnerships, but that's not necessarily the role that WIFA would play in helping to form those partnerships. So
Okay. Thank you.
And while we're on this slide, I will take one of the questions from an anonymous attendee as well. They asked to confirm projects within the Phoenix, Pinal, and Tucson AMAs are not eligible, but projects within other AMAs are. Is that correct? And yes, that is entirely correct. So the only AMAs that are ineligible for this fund are the Phoenix, Pinal, and Tucson AMAs. That means that the Prescott AMA, the newly created Douglas AMA, those are all fine. That if you are located there, that does not preclude you from participating in this fund. And if a new AMA is created between now and the end of the fund, that also would not preclude you. So it's just those big three. And then as long as you're outside of those, you are geographically eligible to apply. Next question, also from an anonymous attendee. With a new DWID, would it be better to continue with the SRF application, or should we change to the water supply development application?
yeah, that we know that that's going to be a question, and it's a really hard one to answer, honestly. The financial benefits are something to think about. The timing of when you're going to need funding is something to think about. Obviously, through our SRF program, we offer loans with a good amount of loan forgiveness, and depending on if your project is, resolving a public health threat or for a disadvantaged community, we could offer quite a bit of loan forgiveness there. For the Water Supply Development Fund, because this is in many ways a new fund for us, while we have it opening up now, it will be a little bit more time until funds are likely going to be available for your project. If you submitted an application today for water supply development and today for the SRF program, just because the SRF program has been an ongoing program for us that we already have kind of streamlined as far as the process. So you'll want to think about timing. You'll want to think about the different financial benefits of looking at one fund or another. You could also certainly think about getting co-funding between the two funds to try to really maximize the amount of grants and loan forgiveness that you get in total from us. So we would love to see projects that are co-funded, especially if it's over the $5 million max for that water supply development fund. Anything over that could be, you could look at the SRF program. So there's a lot of considerations to take in there, and we're definitely happy to sit down with people and look closer at the specific projects to see, where we think it would fit better in.
Yep. And our project managers are very good at that process too. So, as you talk to those folks, because they know those programs inside and out, just like Lindsay does. So it definitely would be worth that conversation. Richard Candelaria asks, should we submit our application directly to you, or do we have to submit it through the Apache NRCD?
And Richard, and I know I recognize your name, but if you want to come off mute and just let me know what type of entity.
And Richard, I will allow you to talk here in just a second once I find you. There you are.
Because certainly Apache NRCD would be an eligible entity. So if your entity is not eligible, going through the NRCD would be a good option. But I'm trying to remember where you're coming from, Richard.
Concho, Arizona, we're a private nonprofit water company, the Concho
Right.
Water
Yes.
Company. We're
They
not a district, so that's why.
not a district, but ACC regulated public water system. Is that correct?
I I I I don't know if we're publicly regulated or not, to be honest with you.
Okay. Yeah, it's certainly something we can help you if you want to reach out to us one-on-one just to try to figure out if as because I think Concho is not technically a city or town, it's unincorporated, is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
So we can certainly help figure out how to become eligible. If it's through Apache NRCD, like I said, that could be a good option, or um, if you are a public water system and have a PWSID number, that would be the other avenue for eligibility that we could look at.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question. Paul Hendricks asks, if a city partners with a tribe, do we use the city's MHI or the tribe's MHI or a combination thereof?
Yep, great question. It is something that we'll look at on a case-by-case basis. We want the MHI to be representative of the community who the project will be benefiting the most. So if it's going to be benefiting both the tribe and the neighboring city, then we will likely look at a combination of the two, but we will do that on a case-by-case basis. So if it's primarily benefiting the tribe, then it likely would be appropriate to use the tribe's MHI.
Luis Pedroza asks, as a municipal provider, does the project need to be within city limits or can it be just within our service area to be eligible? The city currently services communities outside of city limits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Luis, I don't think there's any restrictions on it being within city limits that I can think of, so that wouldn't be a problem as far as I can think right now.
Perfect. Ernest Behringer asks, if a grant and or loan is granted, what's the relationship between the grantee, the AMA, and WIFA in terms of the scope, the management, schedule, fund usage, all of that kind of thing?
So I'm not totally understanding the linkage to the AMA part of it, but certainly you'd be working with WIFA staff to, confirm as you're going through the project that the project is happening. We'll have the project managers working with you to as far as like making sure we're staying on scope, staying on schedule. It's a reimbursement basis or cost incurred. So similar to the SRF program, you'll incur costs for your project, submit disbursement requests to us that we will review and approve. But as far as there being any sort of linkage to the AMA or reporting requirements or ADWR, that doesn't really apply for this. So hopefully
Yeah, I would. The only reason the AMA is eligible is relevant is to determine geographic eligibility. So as long as you are not within the Phoenix, Pinal, or Tucson AMA, that's the only time you need to worry about whether AMA is included in anything you're doing.
But certainly for the areas outside of those AMAs, so if you're in a different AMA that you're trying to meet those requirements, we would love to see projects that help you meet those requirements. So.
Yep. All right. Another anonymous attendee has asked, if we are a not-for-profit community water company and we have limited resources, but happen to be in a higher income rural community, unincorporated Yavapai County, how much of a negative impact will a high average household income have on our application?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's exactly why we wanted to be very clear and upfront with the scoring within that application. So you can, if you actually open the application, we have every single score listed as well as the financial need score. So it's anywhere from 0 to 100 points for the financial need, which is based on the MHI. If you get 0 financial need points, if the MHI is just over over the maximum to get any points for it, you're still eligible to get that tier 2 of the 60% loan and 40% grant, as long as your project benefits and water supply scores are high enough to get you into that 80%, into that green zone there. So if your MHI is very high, still eligible to get some grant funds, but you're likely not going to be eligible to get 100% grant funds like the blue zones there.
Okay. Next question from Richard Candelaria. The application refers to groundwater wells. Our water source is a spring, so I'm not sure how to answer the questions in section 4.1. For reference, he is referencing 4.1 of the application, which talks about water demands. And so the question is whether the water provider has experienced groundwater wells going dry or a water outage of greater than 24 hours. And so, Richard, I think and I'll let Lindsay follow up on this, but the way that you would answer section 4.1 is that you would check any of those boxes that apply. If none of those boxes apply, then those 50 points for that water demand in that particular question wouldn't be applied to your application. But Lindsay, you're welcome to correct me on that one.
Nope, yep, you totally got it right, Chelsea. I'll only add that those are exactly the types of questions that we're anticipating you all having, and are happy to have our project managers go through the application and those types of questions with you, one-on-one, because they get rather specific, and the application really is meant to, encompass every type of water provider and entity and type of project that we have available. So some questions certainly might not apply to your system, but if there's questions about how to answer things, we're happy to kind of walk you through what the intent of those questions were.
All right. I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A, but we still have plenty of time if somebody is thinking of something, or there's something that you just haven't gotten around to typing in yet, or if you want to raise your hand and unmute from there. Lindsay, while folks are thinking, I will ask a question that I anticipated seeing but haven't seen yet, so that we're clarifying. You talked about grant. I know some of our other grant programs have a matching requirement. Is there any matching requirement on this one?
No matching requirements at all. Like we said, if you're eligible for that tier 1, you could be eligible to get 100% grant with no match at all required. If you're in that tier 2, it's going to be split between grant and loan. So you could almost think of the loan portion as the match requirement for that grant portion, but no technical matching requirements at all for this.
All right. Question from Sonia Gasho. Can this fund be used to create a water district? We have many folks who need it. There are several small water providers, but our vision is to create a new one that would link many of those systems and folks.
So, and I guess, Sonia, the question would be what type of project that would be necessarily. So if it's actually linking the different water systems with like water lines and then creating that system, likely yes. But we certainly, those are the types of detailed questions that we can sit down and go over in more depth with you.
Thank you. What we've been talking about, it got put on the back burner and we'd like to do again though. And the reason I ask is because you were hinting a little bit at the applicants need to be working with incorporated areas, even though it's for rural Arizona. And we're looking at, there's several small water providers, not all of them very dependable. And so we were looking at creating a water district with wells and pipelines, potentially including those small water providers in, and they would be like a backup maybe to the main well. And so that's what but most of those communities are unincorporated. And so that's why I was like, wait, where would that fit? So
yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad to clarify. So when we were talking about if it's incorporated or unincorporated, I was really just thinking about the eligibility requirements of if you're a city or a town, you're just kind of automatically eligible, as well as like the districts, commissions, that whole list. Or you could be a water provider, and within a water provider, there's several categories, but that includes a public water system. So if you have multiple small unincorporated public water systems, the eligibility piece is met because it's a PWS system. If And then consolidating multiple PWSs into one, I think would certainly, those types of projects that are required to get that done would be eligible costs. So,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
All right, from Richard Candelaria, can applications be resubmitted if they're not approved in the first round of funding?
Certainly can be resubmitted. We are anticipating, though, I'm not anticipating projects would be denied because of lack of funding, especially in the first couple years really of running this program. It's a revolving fund that we anticipate will hopefully get additional appropriations from our legislature. So the projects getting denied would mostly just be from they're not eligible, or if you apply and you are hoping to get grant funds and are not eligible to get grant funds based on the points, that could be where you're thinking about trying to reapply, trying to look at different projects that could get more points within this scoring system so that you're eligible to get the maximum grant funds that are possible. So certainly possible that any project could be recommended not to approve by the committee or denied by the board. That's really their prerogative. But as far as the projects that we put forward for them to consider, we're going to confirm eligibility and everything beforehand. And as long as the project's eligible and we have funding to fund it, I am not anticipating projects being denied outright.
All right, question from Stuart. Will there be an attendee list for today with contact information? That is a good question. We hadn't talked that one through actually. So Lindsay and I may need to go back to our folks and see if that's something that we can publish. And if we do, it'll be on the same site as our presentation and the recording of the webinar. So we'll get back to you on that one. From Paul Hendricks, if there's a well shut down due to PFAS, can the project to replace the water supply through interconnection or wellhead treatment be eligible?
Yes, certainly eligible for Water Supply Development Fund. I would also say, though, that might be one that if you reached out to us, we might try to direct you towards our state revolving fund, especially right now because we have some supplemental funds specifically for PFAS or other emerging contaminant types of projects, which we are able to provide lots of loan forgiveness for those types of projects. So that's a great example of one where eligible for both funds, but it might be a better option to look at the SRF for that.
All right. So again, not seeing any questions or additional questions to that, but want to give a few more minutes as folks are thinking of that. While I give you that time, I will bring your attention to the email address on this screen, WSDRF, Water Supply Development Revolving Fund, at WIFA.gov. If you have questions, that's where you submit your application. So that's important to know that email address for that reason. But also, if you have specific questions about this fund and you don't quite know who to ask, send them to that. We will be able to route them to either your correct project manager or Lindsay or I, and figure out how to answer those questions and get those conversations started. So that's a good email to have offhand if you just know you might have some questions later on and don't quite know where to direct them. Another question from Richard. We do not own the land where our water rights are located. Could the funds be used to buy the land so we have more control of our water?
That's a good question, Richard. We might have to get back to you on that. Certainly the purchase of water rights are eligible. The purchase of land, we'll have to look into that a little.
Yeah, we can put that one on our need to do more digging list for sure. Okay, well, Lindsay, I am not seeing any additional questions, but like I mentioned, please use either this email or any other contact information you have with WIFA staff. If you do think of things later on, we're happy to answer those questions, happy to assist you in any way possible. We are very excited about this fund. I think there's a lot of opportunity for it and need for it out in rural Arizona. And so we look forward to doing anything we can to help you get these applications submitted and get our process going. So thank you all so much for attending today's webinar. It will be posted online and we'll let you all know when that happens. But in the meantime, keep working on those applications and have a great rest of your day.